They had prepared for the worst and gotten something else entirely. Lupe and Danny Reyes had spent 6 weeks reading about introducing a rescue dog to a household with a young child. They had read the articles about slow introductions and scent exchanges and baby gates as transitional tools, and the importance of never leaving them alone together in the early weeks. They had a plan. They had followed it. On day 1, Rosario, a 3-year-old pit bull mix from the county shelter, brindle and white, 48 pounds, with the broad head and the warm brown eyes of the breed at its most characteristic, walked through the front door, assessed the house in a single circuit, and sat down beside their 2-year-old daughter Valentina. She had not left her side since, not in the hover and guard way that could indicate anxiety, not in the follow-every-step way of a dog still mapping a new environment, in the specific settled way of an animal that has arrived at a location and concluded, "This is where I am meant to be. This small person is what I am meant to be beside." Valentina, who had been briefed at length that the new dog was someone she had to be gentle with, had no such reservations. She called the dog Rosie and attempted to share her crackers on day 2. Rosario accepted this arrangement. If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you're in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. On the 3rd day, Lupe was playing with Valentina on the playmat when she noticed the dog doing something she hadn't seen before. Rosario was seated beside the mat in her usual position, but her attention was not on the room in general. It was specifically on Valentina's face. She was watching her breathing. Not the ambient attention of a dog keeping track of a child, the focused monitoring of an animal that has identified something requiring sustained observation. Lupe sat back and watched. Valentina seemed fine. She was doing what she always did on the playmat, sorting blocks, talking to herself, the particular focused stream of consciousness of a 2-year-old who narrated her own actions. But Rosario watched her face with the specific sustained attention that Lupe, who was a respiratory therapist, and who had spent 9 years watching faces for the specific signs of breathing compromise, recognized as clinical in a way she couldn't dismiss. She looked at Valentina more carefully. The lip color was fine. The breathing rate seemed normal. But there was something. She noticed it on the 4th and 6th breath. A very slight asymmetry in how Valentina's chest rose. Not obvious. Not something she would have noticed if Rosario hadn't drawn her attention there. She called the pediatrician. She described what she'd observed. Dr. Patricia Amara had been Valentina's pediatrician since birth. She said, "Come in today. Has your dog ever done something you couldn't explain until it was the only thing that made sense? Tell us in the comments. These stories deserve to be heard." The chest X-ray showed a small area of consolidation in the right lower lobe, the beginning of a pneumonia, caught at a point where it was still subsegmental. Not yet causing fever, not yet producing symptoms, Valentina would have communicated as feeling unwell. It was the kind of finding that, in a child who seemed otherwise fine, might not be caught until the presentation escalated. Dr. Amara prescribed an antibiotic course and a follow-up in 5 days. She also said while they were wrapping up, something that stayed with Lupe. "You're a respiratory therapist, which means you know how to look at breathing. But you said you wouldn't have looked if the dog hadn't been watching." She paused. "That dog brought something to your attention that your professional training then interpreted. That's not an accident. That's a system." The pneumonia resolved. Valentina was fully recovered in 10 days. Rosario remained at her side throughout. Every guardian deserves to be recognized, even the ones who never asked for anything in return. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Lupe had looked up in the weeks following the research on dogs and respiratory detection. There was less published literature than she'd hoped. The work on dogs and cancer detection was substantial. The work on seizure detection was growing, but respiratory compromise in children was a narrower field. What she found was largely anecdotal and theoretical. Dogs detecting the specific VOC profile of respiratory infection, the chemical signature of bacterial or viral consolidation in the airway, the subtle change in breath composition that preceded visible symptoms. None of it was the controlled study she would have liked. All of it was consistent with what had happened in her living room. She sat one evening on the playmat with Valentina, who was recovered and uninterested in the drama of the previous 2 weeks. and Rosario was beside them. Her usual position, the settled weight of a dog who had decided this was her location and did not require any further conversation about it. Valentina leaned against the dog with the complete unconscious trust of a child who had spent 10 days recovering and who had never been told how she had been helped. Rosario rested her chin on Valentina's shoulder. This was not a story with a dramatic revelation. It was not a night rescue or a near-miss emergency. It was a dog who arrived in a house on a Monday and sat down beside a child and watched her breathe. And a parent who had the specific training to understand what she was watching. And a pneumonia caught before it needed hospitalization. 3 things happening in sequence because a rescue dog had walked through a door and made a decision. The next story is about a dog who detected something in a house that the family had been living with for months. Subscribe so you're there when it posts.